Good morning, Thursday, February 23rd, 2023. This is one of, this is a book I wrote in 2022. It's called Which Players Had Better Stats and Achievements? Old School versus New School Baseball. I analyze two different time periods of Major League Baseball. It's 150 years from 1871 until 1949, I consider old school baseball. From 1950 to 2022, I consider new school baseball. So I compare the old schoolers with the new schoolers. Who was better? Who had better stats, achievements, and accomplishments? So I wrote this book. It was a lot of fun. And in my chapters, I get specific. Who was better in batting average? Those in the 1871 through 1949, or those who played from 1950 to 2022? Who had better batting averages? Cumulative. I'm going to use that word a lot. Then my next chapters, I do most hits, runs scored, runs batted in, home runs, triples, doubles, singles, slugging, on base, total bases, base on balls, stolen bases. Then I get into pitching, wins, innings, games started, complete games, strikeouts, shutouts, ERA, and winning percentage. So I have a chapter on all that, and I analyze it. This video, batting average. Who had a better batting average? Well, let me break it up. This first video will be the old school. Then the next video will be new school, and we'll compare it. 1871 through 1879, cumulative batting average of all the players who played then in the 1870s, 360. 1880s, 368. 1890s, 390. This is cumulative of all the decades, and you add it all up and you average it out. 1900s, 372. 1910s, 387. 1920s, 400. 1930s, 376. And the 1940s, 356. So the aggregate, if you add up all those decades, 75-year period from 1871 through 1949, about 75 years, the average batting average was 376. As far as the high, those who led the league. That's how I did it. Who was good in the 1870s? Cap Hansen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times he led the league. 1880s. Looks like Dan Brothers. 1, 2, 3 times for Dan Brothers. Cap Hansen had 3 times in the 1880s. 1890s. Well, you've got Brothers twice, Burkett, Jesse Burkett twice, Willie Keeler twice. 1900s, who dominated? Honus Wagner, 1, 2, 3, 4 times he dominated and led. 1910s, got to give it to Ty Cobb. 1920s, Roger Hornsby. And then the 1930s. Oh, you got a lot of guys winning. You got Bill Terry, Al Simmons, Fox, Judge, Chuck Klein, Lou Gehrig. Got Archie Vaughan, Appling, Medwick. Looks like Jimmy Fox would be the guy in the 1930s. In the 1940s, you got to give it to Ted Williams. So what do you think? In batting average, Who was better, the old school or the new school? Well, let's look at new school. That starts, I started 1950. Cumulative batting average 351. 1960s, 337. 1970s, 346. 1980s, 359. 1990s, 359. And then the year 2000 through, and then the 2000s, 339. And then 2010 through 2016, 295. So remember I said that the aggregate batting average, you take all 10 years in the decade, the highest for each year, and you add the 10 decades, and the average for the old schoolers was 376. Between 1950 and 2016, the aggregate batting average 340. So as far as batting average, old school wins. Who dominated in the 1950s? Stan Musial. 1960s, Roberto Clemente. 1970s, Rod Carew. 1980s, Wade Boggs. 1990s, Tony Gwynn. And then in the year 2000s, got some ties here. You've got Larry Walker, Vlad Guerrero, and Chipper Jones. And then in 2010 and on, you got David Ortiz. So what I did was, for each decade, I took each individual year who had the highest batting average. For example, 1950, Stan Musial, 346. And then 51 through 1959. Who led each year? That's how I came up with the cumulative batting average for each decade. Do you agree with me? The old school baseball players from 1871 through 1949 had a better cumulative batting average than new school baseball players who played from 1950 through 2022. And I proved it in this book. If you look at the stats, and stats don't lie, do you agree or disagree? The highest batting average for the first 75 years was Hugh Duffy, 440. The highest batting average from 1950 through 2022, you know who has it? Tony Gwynn, 394. We know that Ty Cobb had 12 batting titles first 75 years. The second, and then Honus Wagner had 8. In the second 75 years, after 1950, Rod Carew had 7 batting titles. Tony Gwynn had 8. Do you agree or disagree? Old schoolers were better contact hitters. They didn't strike out as much. Now, you may say the first 75 years playing conditions was maybe easier, maybe pitchers are easier. I disagree. You still had quality pitchers throwing the ball. Their intent was to get the guy out. They didn't just lob it up there. Maybe in the first couple of years, I think they had some underhand and all that. But eventually the pitchers, they didn't want to give up hits. They had a lot of Hall of Fame pitchers back then. I'll get into pitching wins, and you'll see a lot of guys in the first 75 years were quality pitchers. But these baseball players were quality hitters back then. And consider the environment they played in. Baseball fields, most of their games were in the daytime. You had weather conditions. The ballparks weren't as great as they are now. And travel. They traveled by train, by bus, and then later in the 30s and 40s, 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, some of them by car. The new schoolers, they got planes. They can fly from New York to California in 5 hours. Of course, the old schoolers, they didn't play past St. Louis, Missouri, which is halfway in the country. But they had to take the train travel, which took hours, sometimes days. How about the equipment? The gloves were small back then, back in the old times. How about the baseballs? They were dirty. They only used 1 or 2 baseballs a game, and then eventually they got to more baseballs. And the new school, equipment, the bats are better, the gloves are better, the baseballs are better. Is the pitching easier or harder? Old school, was it easier, the pitching? Or is it new school, is it harder to hit? That's debatable. But one thing we do have, according to the Hall of Fame players, this book focuses on Hall of Fame players, is that I think I've proven the point. The old school baseball players had a better batting average cumulatively than the new school baseball players. Old school, 376 average. New school, 340 average. That's a difference of 36 points. All right, that covers batting average. The next one is hits. Most hits leading the league. And I'll go through every decade. I'll do the first 75 years and the second 75 years, okay? Thanks for watching here. I'm out.